This tutorial will describe a technique for creating scrolling panorama videos. For this example, we'll be working with a panorama image displayed here that was created by Lightroom from 26 vertically oriented digital photos. The panorama that resulted is virtually a 360-degree panning view that was taken from a roof that's over top our pier. This particular panoramic image is a JPEG, and it's 40,089 pixels wide by 4,096 pixels high. To create the scrolling effect, we'll import the panorama into Camtasia, and then we'll use a single animation point to pan it from left to right. In a new Camtasia project with project settings that are set to HD 1920 by 1080, we're going to import that image. So it's Control-I, select it, open. We'll put it on the timeline. Now when Camtasia puts it on the timeline, it rescales the image and it changes the canvas size. We'll go back here and check project settings. Project settings now are down to 4096 by 418. And that's because the maximum width of an image that can be put on the timeline before rescaling is 4096. The same goes for the height. The other problem with the automatic scaling of the image when you put it on the timeline is that because it's scaled down so much in this case, about a factor of 10, that a lot of the fidelity of the image is lost. Let's go up here and take a look at 300%, and we'll scroll the canvas a little bit till I find some area that I happen to know has fine detail, and that's these boats here. We're zoomed in as much as we can, and this still looks pretty blurry. I've opened the same original size image in Snagit Editor. I'm going to change the zoom factor here to much higher. And then I'm going to scroll around till I find some content to look at. I'm going to try to find that same area where the boats were displayed. We're coming up to it here. And there's the jet ski that was in that previous scene. Notice that the fine detail is readily perceived. That's because we're looking at the image at its native dimensions. I found that if you're going to reduce the size of an image, any reduction greater than about 20 or 25% is going to result in excessive loss in fidelity. Now we're working with a project that we're going to want to produce at 1920 by 1080, 1920 being the widest monitor that most people have. So we're going to have to do something about the image size in order to get it to work in Camtasia. Let me zoom back out here again. I'll point out that even if we use resize image to downsize this particular image in Snagit, if we try to downsize it to where it's 1080 high, well, there's going to be excessive blurring again in the objects. A golden rule of screencasting is to always work with images at their native dimensions. And if you're going to edit at 1920 by 1080 and produce at 1920 by 1080, then you should be working with video or image content that's essentially 1920 by 1080. Of course, this image is a lot wider than 1920. We have to reconcile that somehow. In this particular case, it looks like it would be possible to resize the canvas and just display the part of the panorama that's in the center of the image, and that's because this was a panorama of a waterfront view when we basically have a nice flat horizon to go by. Accordingly, we're going to go to Image, Resize the Canvas, and try to pull out that center slice. We'll do that by leaving the width alone, but changing the height to 1080. And we're going to want to stay center biased. That is to say, we want to pull out the absolute center strip of this entire panorama. So we'll say OK. And we're presented with basically the center strip of that same panorama. The image itself is at native dimensions. We just took away the top and bottom. So I'm going to save this as a different file name. So that's Alt-F-A. And I'm going to call it center slice. And we'll save it. Now we're going to change the zoom. And then we'll pan the image manually and see how our detail looks back at those boats again. And we must be near the boats here. I got to pull this down. You'll notice that everything looks a lot larger here because we're looking at a smaller slice. There's our jet ski, sharp as a tack, and so this approach will work and allow us to preserve original image quality in a Camtasia project. Let's zoom back out again. Now, even though this image is only 1080 tall, it's still way too wide at 40,000 pixels to work in a Camtasia project. So we're going to have to slice and dice this image and end up with a number of parts that are some number wide but 10,080 high. Those will work well within Camtasia if we do it right. Specifically, if we import images that are less wide than 4096, we won't get any scaling, and that's what we want to avoid in this case. So what we're going to do, considering this is 40,000 and change pixels wide, we're going to break this down into separate images that are 4,000 pixels wide by 1,080 pixels high. Accordingly, we're going to basically end up with a total of 10 separate images. The last one is going to be a little wider than 4,000 because we have to accommodate the extra 89 pixels in this panorama. So to proceed, we're going to start changing the size of the canvas. First thing I'm going to do is to save this image as a PNG. It's currently a JPEG, so it's Alt-F-A. Type here and change this to a PNG. Save. Reason we're doing that is we'll get a little better fidelity out of a PNG image. Now that we're working with a PNG image of the center slice, let's start chopping it up. We'll go to Image, resize the canvas. We're going to start on the left side, and I think I said we're going to use a 4,000 width piece. So we'll change the width here to 4,000. We're going to leave the height at 1080. We're going to bias it to the left because I just want to end up with this section of the current canvas. I'll say OK. And that's what we have. Now I need to save this, so that's Alt-F-A as a separate image. And I'm going to call it number 1. We'll click Save. Now that it's been saved, I'm going to use undo, Control-Z, to return us to the original size image. To grab the next slice, I'm going to cut the canvas so it goes basically here all the way to the end. Once again, Image, resize the canvas. This time I want to set the width to 4,000 pixels shorter than full, so that'll be 36,089. And that'll give me, I bias it to the right, everything other than the first chunk we already cut out. So I'll click OK. And we've shortened the image. Next I want to cut off this little section on the left. So once again, Image, resize the canvas. We want a 4,000 pixel chunk. Same height. Bias it to the left so I just get this section. OK. And I'm going to call this number 2 in my sequence. So it's Alt F A 2, and I'll save that. And then once again, Control Z to undo that shortening of the width. And I want to repeat the process for the next section, which will be somewhere around here. So once again, image, resize the canvas. We want to drop this another 4,000, so that'll be 32,089. Same height, bias it to the right, so we only get this section here. Okay. And you can see we're ready to go here. So once again, image, resize canvas, a 4,000 pixel wide slice, and bias it to the left so we just get this piece. Okay. And once again, we'll save it. Alt F A. This will be our third piece. Save. And once again, Control Z to restore the now shortened original image. Off camera, I'm going to continue that process until we get to our last section. And we'll pull in the last one. Alt I, Z, should be 88, should be 4089 wide. Bias it to the right this time. I just want the end. Okay. There it is. Save it. Should be number 10. We're finished. And we can close snag it. Back in a new Camtasia project. Double checking our project settings. 1920 by 1080. And we're going to set this to a 60 frame per second editing because of the scrolling that we'll apply later. Confirming that's the case, we're going to bring in those images we just saved. So that's Control I, and there were 10 of them. Open. Now we're going to zoom down the canvas a little bit. This will make it easier to work with. Select that first image, put it on the timeline. It got squished down, but we're going to put it back to 100%. It's wider than the canvas, and that's perfect because that's what we want, but the height is dead on. So we're going to slide this to the right till we get canvas snapping just at the left edge. Then we'll add our next image, which will be number 2. Change its size back to 100. Slide it to the right. And in this case, we're going to Control A to select both images and slide everything over again. We'll do one more. Image number 3. Add it to the timeline. Bump it to 100%. It's selected. I'm going to drag him over, line him up. Control A selects everything and slide him over. Off camera, I'm going to hand assemble the rest of these images in this fashion. The 10th image is now on the timeline and aligned in the canvas. I have all the images selected, so I'm going to scroll everything back towards the right until the first or the leftmost images is lined up in the canvas. And by the way, while we're doing this, when I get to my little boats, which has been my checkpoint for fidelity, what we're going to do is zoom in and just see how sharp the image looks. Here comes my boats. This will work. We'll go up here, 300%. I'll pan the canvas and you can see that our jet ski is sharp as a tack. So we'll go back and fit this. Again, everything's selected, so we'll finish our pan to the left because this is where we want to have our panorama start when we do the scroll. And in this particular case, because of the way these images were taken, they were taken clockwise, starting looking to the west. the panorama will scroll the same way that the images were taken with the camera. Alright, we're there now. And we're going to save this project. We have a lot of work in it, so that's Control S. And I'm going to call it Example Scrolling Panorama. And I like to put a date on my projects. And we'll save that. Now, for purposes of this project, I'm going to want to put some background music against the panorama. I like to make the panorama scroll long enough or slow enough so that they scroll very smoothly, and they also time out as the music ends. So I happen to know I'm going to be using a piece of music, so I'm going to set my duration to 7 minutes long. So with everything selected, right click all these guys, duration, 7 minutes is 420 seconds. Click OK. Control Shift 7 to bring everything into view. We're right at 7 seconds. Now we're going to group all these guys. So that's Control G. And we're going to want to pan it so it's necessary to use an animation point. So I'm going to put the playhead at the end of the project. The group is selected, so it's Shift A to add an animation keyframe. And I'm going to drag him out a little bit right now. And then I'm going to put the playhead back at the end of the animation. And now I have to scroll everything in the canvas so that it ends what I want it to do. So I'm just dragging all this stuff over. Notice we're moving the entire image, which now is 40,089 pixels wide, but 1,000 pixels high. But it's been hand stitched out of 10 separate little images. And once again, this process will retain original fidelity from the original panorama. So here's the end of that. And I'm going to put the playhead back a little bit just to see how it looks. Yes, we're there. Definitely. So we're going to pull the animation back to t=0. So that's where we start the process. And I'm going to right click the animation. I want to make sure it's linear easing. That'll look better in my opinion. Now if we put this back to fit and we scrub the timeline, we're basically getting a nice scrolling panorama. There's our boats coming up again. And once again, I'll point out that at a high zoom, we'll pan down to where we see some of those boats. The fidelity of the original panorama has been preserved. And we'll continue our pan here just to see how we're doing. And we end up looking good. Now another thing that's worth doing is we want to check to make sure that all these images are hand aligned properly. So we're going to open the group. We're going to scroll back to the very beginning. Select and then scroll until we see the junction between the first pair. And there it is. Now I'm going to select another image that's out of the way here. And at a high zoom, I see a little line here. So I'm going to have to select that image on the right of the first one and nudge it over a little bit. Got rid of that line, so that worked. So now we'll select the next junction, which will be the third image. Back to fit. And I'll scrub some more until I find that boundary. And there it is. I'm going to do the same thing. Deselect that pair. I have a little more of a line there. And this is going to continue all the way across. So to fix that, I'm going to select that image, and with it selected, go back to high zoom, and then I'm going to nudge it. And again, I'm using the arrow keys with the image selected into canvas. Deselect here, haven't done it enough. Deselect, that looks pretty good. Back to fit. And I'll continue this process for all the images until I ensure that all the sections are touching or abutted just correctly. I've now completed aligning the images at the last juncture. So we'll scrub back to the beginning of the timeline, Control Home. Now if we scrub again, we have a nice contiguous presentation of that panorama. And we're ready to produce. Before we start the production, I would add in my music clip here and then trim the duration of the panorama and the corresponding animation point to match the end of the music, so that when the panorama finishes its scroll, the music has finished. And of course, when we produce this, we'll do a custom production. That'll be Control P and MP4 with the player. To make it simple, I'm going to put a replay button on there, pause it, start. Size will be 1920 by 1080. And again, we're producing this from my effective image that's 40,000 pixels wide by 1080 high. And under video settings, notice these, I'm going to work with a bitrate value instead of quality. And that's because these tend to be very demanding productions to display in a browser. And if you use a quality setting of 65 or 70, it'll often play in a very staggering fashion in a browser, especially off a website. But 3000 seems to work pretty well. And I would go ahead and produce with these settings. And I'm going to do that off camera. The production has completed and we're looking inside the destination output folder. Here's the MP4 we produced. Again, if we look at the specs, size 1920 1080, 60 frames per second. Notice the bitrate, it's tolerable. If you aim for 3000, you'll probably end up less than 4000, which is usually sufficient for getting a good smooth playback. I'm going to play the video now in a browser locally. And I'm going to turn off the audio. Start to play. It pans very smoothly. I added a little watermark guide down here before I finished the production process. And I'm going to stop this, scrub over to where we find those boats. I'm going to just check the quality of the video. And there we are. And if we look carefully, we can see that everything on the boat is nice and sharp. We can read the characters here. And if we look hard, we can read this. This was a big image, and yet we get a very high quality production. Here I've scrubbed over to another location in the video. These yellow cages are crab huts. Notice the fine detail of their mesh. And if I scrub over some more here, I have another location where there is some small fonts. You'll see it on this speed limit sign here. I happen to know that the little fonts at the top say Saturdays, Sundays, holidays, but I doubt you can read that. But this is very, very sharp considering the size of the image we started working with.